So, I just had quite a long, not even writing session, but like editing my edited words brainstorming session where I fixed a major problem I was having in the first half of the second act of my novel. Or if you think in 4 acts, which I think is incredibly helpful, it would be just the second act. And it made me think about a piece of neglected, maybe NaNoWriMo advice that I want to chat about. So, how I like to think of story, and this is, I think, how most people will tend to think of it, is you have your first act, which is sort of your introduction to the character. They pass a point of no return going into the new world. The first half of the middle, or the second act, is the character is really a fish out of water. It's the fun and games. It's the, oh no, what am I doing? The character kind of doubling down on their flaw and doing things continuously. Then you have the midpoint, which brings you to a shift in both the stakes are upped, and the character's point of view. And then you have the fourth act, which is the ending of your novel. And I have been struggling so much with what I would call the second act of my novel. And that's because, and maybe you've experienced this as well, my character in the second part of the novel is being somewhat passive. And let's talk about why that's a common pitfall. So I'm going to put this really great, and I will credit where I got it. I can't remember exactly right now, but it's from helpingwritersbecomeauthors.com. And it shows a positive character arc. It has 3-act structure. Again, you can think of the time between the first act and the midpoint as the second act, and the 50% point and the 75% point as the third act if you want. That's how I like to think about it. But basically, it shows how the character progresses through those acts from the misbelief or lie standpoint. So in the hook is the character firmly believing their lie. So a big part of that hook, which also might show up as theme stated, is the character acting out their misbelief. The inciting incident is a hint that the misbelief or lie won't work. So for example, if you have a character who believes that you have to follow the rules, follow expectations, yada, 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 the inciting incident is something that is kind of forcing her to not follow the rules. Then you have the first plot point, which shows the lie is no longer effective. Now the character doesn't realize it at this point, but your character is following this misbelief, doubling down on it, and despite their misbelief, despite the thing that they think is effective, they end up in your story. They end up in your second act. You have the first pinch point where they're punished for using the lie, and then you have the midpoint, and I love the midpoint on this graph. They call it the moment of truth, where you see the truth. The character sees the truth, but doesn't yet reject the lie. So this is a point where your character's view kind of shifts. I think in Save the Cat, or in other story frameworks, it's also said, okay, up until now, usually the character is failing in the world. The midpoint, they learn something and they start to thrive more or less in the world. And then they reject the lie, embrace the truth, use the truth to gain meat, enters new truth-empowered world. Really great graphic. I absolutely love it. Why I think there's a problem before the midpoint is because your character has to continue kind of acting in the same way that they have been acting the whole time towards, I am going to hang on to this lie, this misbelief. And for me, that has manifested itself so much in the character becoming passive. So in my story, the premise of it is a girl gets swept into a heist. Problem being that until the midpoint, she's really not all invested in the heist, and she doesn't really want to be there. She doesn't. She's not a fan. She still believes she believes her misbelief from before, and it's keeping her from being all in. So how it was earlier today was it was feeling very passive, and my character was feeling very much like a victim. Like she was, Beauty trapped in the Beast Castle, being forced to doing something she doesn't want to do. The Others were kind of apologizing, saying, I'm really sorry, you're kind of a prisoner in this, there's nothing you can do. And it wasn't sitting well with me, and it made me really want to not go to the next scene, because the character who is being forced to do something that they don't want to do is not interesting. They don't want anything, or they want something that is outside of the story, not in the story, and that is hard to write. That is not good. And so I sat there and I thought, okay, this isn't working. And I decided I needed to go through and re-edit and make the character want something in the story. There is an internship that's part of the story. Originally, this morning, she was being basically forced into doing this internship against her will. I turned the tables this afternoon. It just came to me. They've been threatened by an external antagonist. She's been swept into this heist. I just had my protagonist threaten her soon-to-be love interest back and say, I will do this for you, but I need this. And if I do not get this, I will go to the police. And I was reading it and I was like, this is it. She has to want this internship. Her being there has to have conditions. She has to believe so much in this lie that she is pushing back on the others, that she is pushing back. And yes, she'll be punished for using the lie before the midpoint, of course, at that pinch point. But the difference was A, her passiveness, and B, power dynamics. It's interesting what kind of power dynamics you might want to write about. In my story, I didn't want to write about where the character is a victim. This is a fun story. It's not meant to be all Beauty and the Beast Stockholm Syndrome. It's not meant to be like that. And so I had to find a way to, after she's been forced to do a whole bunch of stuff that she doesn't want to do, she's been swept up in this thing, I had to find a way for the power balance to re-equalize. And it turned out that my character using the lie, sorry, I'm trying to avoid spoilers, using the lie to, doubling down too hard to become overly active, to want something new and to push back, was the way to equalize that power balance. You want something from me? Well, I want something from you. And now, instead of this sort of bordering on Stockholm type thing, we have much more of a, we're in a deal. You know, we're kind of antagonists against each other. We have a deal here. But it's working now. It wasn't working before. It is now working. She is being active. So what is the neglected Preptober advice? That little bit between the 25% point and the 50% point is not a passive point. Stuff is not just happening to them. You have to make it so they are doing things. So they're taking the reins, even if they're failing, even if they're flailing, even if they're a fish out of water. They have to have their own agenda. Like a fish trying to wiggle its way through a sandpit, it is not going to stop wiggling. It just has to keep wiggling and keep swimming and doing what it has always wanted to do in a new place. And there are consequences and there are things, but the character needs to keep pushing through on what they want, on their, through their line of protecting their misbelief, as they have been doing, but just in this new environment. And they can escalate, they can change, they can become more cutthroat, but goodness, this change that I've made of having the character, before she was like, oh, I just want to follow the rules, I don't really want to do this. Now she's like, okay, you want me to do this? I am going to threaten you back. And the fact that she threatens that she'll go to the police fits in very, very well with her character. It harkens back to something that happened earlier. It has been a great change. I'm so excited about it. Oh, I love writing sometimes. Sometimes when you're just sitting there and you figure it out, it's amazing. So, I don't know how much advice that was, said more as just sharing something very exciting that happened to me. But take with it what you will. I hope it's helpful. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.